Alright, we pick up our story where we left off last part with the Sludge villain arc. I can't believe I'm saying that. I have never once in my life had a part 1 that ended up having me not cover the Sludge villain arc. So this is like a first. So first and foremost, leave a like on the video just for that alone. But no, seriously. Okay, Sludge villain arc. Like we all know, the day would pretty much begin with the teacher telling them all that they need to focus on their future and what they're gonna do before suddenly throwing the papers up in the air and being like, you all want to become heroes! This pretty much ends up leading to the same old, same old. Ultimately, in this specific timeline, Deku does not get bullied by Bakugo. Once class ends, Bakugo's not gonna go over to him and be like, hey Deku, you're a nerd, you're going to 1A, or technically UA, my bad. But yeah, I just don't see that happening. Instead, what I can actually more realistically see happen is Bakugo would be telling everybody that he's going to be the greatest, he's going to be the best, yada yada yada, and then we suddenly get the teacher saying, oh, and Izuku Midoriya, you also want to go to the national school. Can't believe this year we're going to be having 2 candidates for UA. That's impressive. Well, I hope both of you get in. As Bakugo turning towards to see Deku, would kind of just see Deku in the back of the class, just like really in his own world. Like he's having his head laid back, he's not really caring about anything, he's just ignoring Bakugo. Suddenly he would look at Bakugo, but just staring at him, he would just look away, not really caring about Bakugo. As class would end, and suddenly we would pretty much get Bakugo going up to Deku as soon as it was over and snatching his notebook from him. It'd be at this moment that Deku, looking towards the direction of Bakugo with his personality having changed a lot after this next time skip and him getting stronger, so much stronger by the way, that now he's become confident in the fact that he's going to make it into this school. Deku would just look at Bakugo and just be like, why are you doing this, Bakugo? I don't have time for this today, so could I just have my notebook back? Bakugo at this point would say, looks like someone's grown overconfident. I'm gonna have to put you back in your place, you damn Deku. As from here, Deku would pretty much just sidestep Bakugo's explosion and walk towards the direction of the dude with his notebook, as he would point his hand out to pretty much signal to give it to him now. As the dude would just like put the notebook in Deku's hand, he puts it in his pocket, and Bakugo, seeing that Deku just like he's not even in a fighting stance, bro. This dude just like nonchalantly dodged his explosion straight to his face and walked over to grab the book. This pisses Bakugo off, who shoots a massive explosion towards the direction of Izuku, who would simply hold one hand out, as on his arm a small, like not like a small but like a medium-sized like water shield would appear in his arm, which would have come from the water inside of his own body. As this would royally piss Bakugo off, and the 2 goons that were with Bakugo would be stunned that he was able to block that and just walk away like it was nothing. This would ultimately lead to Bakugo saying, damn that Deku, I'll kill him, come on, as both of them would be like, hey Bakugo, maybe we should just let him off the hook, you know? He wasn't even fighting back after all. And Bakugo, realizing that both of his goons are clearly scared, he would get pissed. Like, this dude is like, you think you're stronger than me? And so his goons would be like, no Bakugo, like that's not it, right? So now Bakugo's over there, you know, mad at his own goons while Deku's just walking home. It'd be at this point that Deku, realizing that he wasted a lot of time there with Bakugo, would end up deciding to take a different path, which ultimately leads him to the Sludge villain. It'd be at this point that while Deku's walking, like, I mean, the dude is literally just chilling, holding the 2 backstraps that he has on his back, when suddenly Izuku could just feel this sludgy substance completely emerge his leg. Izuku, feeling this, would look down, wondering what exactly this thing was, as the Sludge villain would completely cover Izuku and say, thanks kid, I've been looking for a body, and yours will do perfect. I didn't know that freak was in town. As Izuku, feeling the Sludge villain completely cover him, would just like squeeze his hand into a fist, as the Sludge villain would just splatter everywhere. As Deku would put his hand through his hair and just walk off. He would turn the corner before All Might could finally make it out of the sewer, and it'd be in this moment that All Might, seeing the Sludge villain had gone literally everywhere, would look around wondering who exactly could have done this and what kind of quirk caused a sludge villain to go splattering like this. All Might would be very concentrated on that question, wondering exactly what was going on. This dude is just sitting there pondering this, mind you, right? And because that would be the case, while All Might is jumping off, making his way towards a rooftop to pretty much just, hide his identity or whatever, All Might would still accidentally drop the bottle. Now, in this timeline, I'm really only doing it so that I could aura farm for Deku, but that's neither here nor there. Anyways, after All Might would drop the bottle, just like in the original, the Sludge villain and Bakugo would end up pretty much having their own little skirmish, which leads to a bunch of pro heroes arriving and a bunch of explosions, and more specifically, fire. Deku, seeing this, about to make his way home, would realize that he might be needed because there is a big fire. And so, Deku would make his way towards there with his hoodie on, just simply thinking to himself that he hopes he doesn't get noticed because he doesn't exactly feel like getting chewed out by the heroes for simply trying to help. And so, Deku would make his way towards there as he would realize what was going on, that it was Kacchan and Bakugo. So Izuku, using his quirk, would pretty much just squeeze his hand once more because the sludge villain is pretty much made of water, like a sludgy material. Izuku was able to pretty much send it splattering everywhere, as bits and pieces of the sludge villain would be sent into fire, and All Might, who was in the crowd watching, would be stunned, being like, who was that? He would look away into the crowd, but because Deku was just a kid with his hands in his pockets at this point walking away, All Might was none the wiser as to who it was that saved him. But Bakugo? Oh, Bakugo definitely noticed that green-haired broccoli walking by. Bakugo, after he would pretty much be praised by all the heroes, would walk over towards Deku and say, "Hey, I didn't need your help back there, you damn extra, so don't get in my way next time." As Bakugo would walk off angrily, and Deku would just kind of stare at him nonchalantly, thinking to himself that Bakugo's so annoying. As after this would happen, we would essentially get the 10-month time skip, in which during this time, Deku would primarily train in 2 places. Now, I got this idea from a subscriber in the Discord server, link in description, but the point is, the idea is essentially he should train by the ocean because of the fact that there is a lot, and I mean a lot of water. So Deku would train in Dagoma Beach much like he does in the original, but unlike in the original, Izuku's not exactly going to be sitting there cleaning it up. Like, Deku doesn't really see any purpose for that, so he would simply clean a small section of the beach, and so nobody would really go to Dagoma Beach, which would work perfect for Deku, meaning he could train in private and nobody would really be bothering him. And the second place was a lot harder to train in, and it happened a lot more far few in between, which would be a volcano. A literal volcano where it was hot and Izuku had a hard time staying hydrated and he just didn't feel good. It was an environment that pretty much made Deku's quirk very, very hard to use. But because Deku put himself in this position, facing off against somebody with the flame quirk was now going to be so much easier, because Deku would pretty much make his way towards a volcano and train down there, with his mom Inko always being there watching him and pretty much telling him to be careful, because it took a lot of convincing to get Inko to even take him to a volcano. She started with saying he should probably just train at a sauna, but after realizing that doesn't exactly work too well, he went to a literal volcano. That said though, after this would all be over, Deku's quirk would be a lot stronger, as you could expect, and he would pretty much be getting ready to take the entrance exam. So Deku, making his way towards UA, would walk inside, never exactly meeting Uraraka because I just don't see him tripping. I don't really see him overthinking things too much, so he would take the written exam and finally make his way towards the outside section, where Izuku would just kind of sit there waiting for President Mike to get them to go, when finally President Mike would say, "Go, go, go, there's no countdowns in a real battle," which ultimately leads to everybody just storming towards the front of the line as they're all making their way towards the robots, and Deku, who would, be towards the back of the pack, would finally end up seeing a couple of robots. Deku would immediately hold one hand out as a large pole looking like thing would form, when suddenly it would be revealed that it's a trident. Deku would create water tridents as he would throw them towards the robots, piercing them, getting a grand total of 12 points immediately, having found like 4 robots. But after Deku would do this, Deku would realize that it's going to be very hard for him to find a bunch of robots unless he makes his way towards the top. So Deku would use his water quirk similarly to Black Whip as he would swing himself to the top of a building, noticing that there's a bunch of robots off in a different direction, and Deku would start jumping from rooftop to rooftop, making his way towards that direction, shooting out a water-like cable that looks like Black Whip as he would go down onto the ground, and the second that Deku would land, water would begin coming from his direction, like from his feet, and it would go towards the direction of this robot, which would ultimately cover it, creating a water prison, which causes the robot to malfunction as Deku would smile, realizing that all his hard work had truly paid off. And this would ultimately lead to Deku continuing to destroy more robots until suddenly the ground would begin to rumble, and Izuku would take note of the zero pointer. The zero pointer at this point would cause everybody to run away, and Deku, knowing that the zero pointer is not exactly going to give him any points, would decide that there's no reason for him to bother with it in that case, as Deku would turn away, going towards the direction of other robots, when suddenly Deku could hear the sound of someone in danger. And Deku hearing this, it's like his body would just move on his own. Deku, using this Black Whip-like ability, would go on to grab onto one of the post lights as he would create another one, and he would slingshot himself towards the direction of Uraraka as he's making his way there quickly, and the zero pointer is pretty much about to crush Uraraka. Deku, realizing that if he doesn't do something, she's gonna maybe die. Like, he's not sure whether the robot could be like turned off manually or what it is, but in this moment, Deku's just thinking, if he does not perform, she's dead. So what Deku would do is pretty much just have a crazy aura farm moment. He would do something that he's been working on for a while, but he's still not sure if it's ready. As Deku, his eyes would glow like a weird bluish green like color as the water from the sewer itself would come shooting out, and multiple sewer lids would just be sent flying into the air as a bunch of like dirty brown looking water would come shooting towards the direction of the zero pointer, and it would shoot a hole straight through his chest. The zero pointer would have this dirty sewer pressurized water just blasting it as a zero pointer would fall backwards, and a bit of that water would like start sprinkling towards their direction, but Deku, holding one hand out, would create this like dome of water that would protect them as he would ask Uraraka if she's okay, taking some rubble off of her leg before asking if she could stand. Quickly he would realize that she couldn't really put any pressure on it, and immediately his water prison dome would go down as Uraraka would thank Izuku like over and over and over, and Deku would say it was no problem as he would turn, to pretty much like after she was okay to try to go take out more robots, but before he could, President Mike would say that the exam was over. And so Deku, noticing this, would just kind of look at Uraraka, seeing that Recovery Girl was heading towards her, and he would just walk off with Uraraka, wondering what his name was, realizing that she had never even given her name or asked for his name, as she would start blushing, wondering if she made a bad first impression. But ultimately, we would pretty much just zoom in on Deku, who was walking home and pretty much made his way towards a bus station. Deku, after that test was over, would have ended up racking up a grand total of 42 robot points and 50 hero points. So Deku's grand score would have been, I think, 92? I said 42 points, right? Yeah, 92. Which means that Deku would have ended up getting the highest marks when it comes to the, the entrance exam, right? So right after this would happen, we would finally get the first day of UA High, as Deku would walk inside, and what do you know it? Bakugo's there. Oh, and guess what? Yeah, he's arguing with another student. Deku, seeing this, would think that this is the same old, and Bakugo never changes. As Bakugo, seeing Deku, would turn to him and say, "I guess this school's just letting anyone in." As Deku would say, "It's funny, I was actually thinking the same thing." Bakugo, hearing that, would be like, "Why, you little," before, he could even do anything. Uraraka would come in behind Izuku and say, "Hey, it's you." And he would begin talking to Uraraka as Bakugo would shoot an insult towards Izuku, but Deku would just completely ignore it, leading to Bakugo getting pissed and yelling at Deku, to which ultimately Aizawa says, "That's enough. Take your seats and listen up. My name is Aizawa, and I'm your homeroom teacher. put these on and meet me outside. He would glare at Bakugo, and Bakugo would take it as he would make his way towards their changing rooms, and all of them would get changed as they would all make their way towards the direction of the, the Quirk apprehension exam that they're about to have. And so we would pretty much end up getting Deku having a little, baseball thrown at him, as Aizawa would pretty much explain to him that he needs him to throw it as hard as he can, telling him to not hold anything back. As Deku, using his quirk, would use water to pretty much throw it and propel it as far as it could, landing him a grand total of 300 and something meters. This would impress everybody in the classroom, as they would all start celebrating the fact that they're able to use their quirks and how much fun this is going to be, which would ultimately lead Aizawa to getting very serious with the class, saying, "Fun? We have 3 years to mold you into heroes, people that are going to have to run into the front lines and take on danger head on. There's nothing fun about this." As the class would all immediately look dejected, and Aizawa would follow that by saying, in fact, to prove that there's nothing fun about this, the person who comes in last place will be expelled. Uraraka, hearing this, would say, "But wait, we already made it into UA, that's not fair." And Aizawa would go on to explain that in this school, he's allowed to run his classroom however he sees fit, and if she's not okay with that, well then she can get expelled right now. As Uraraka would stay quiet and everybody else would go up next. Everybody would proceed to go do the ball throw next, and Bakugo would use its explosion to get an even better score than Deku, as Bakugo, being the person that he is, would smirk towards Deku's direction, followed by them taking the rest of the tests. Unfortunately for Izuku, he wouldn't exactly get the best scores or have some sort of crazy aura farm moment, just because his quirk isn't exactly going to come in handy with the 50-meter dash or the grip or the standing long jump. Maybe the standing long jump, he could use his water to clear it. The repeated side-to-side steps, not really seeing too much he could do with that. Ball throw, he has a pretty impressive mark, but nothing crazy. Sit-ups, that's basic. I don't know how his water's going to help. Toe touch, like I said, not going to help. And then the distance run. He's pretty fast, but yeah, like I said, nothing too crazy is exactly going to happen. After this test would be over, Bakugo would have actually ended up getting way better scores than Deku, leading to him being in 3rd place, as Bakugo would be in 7th or 8th. This would lead Bakugo to snarl at Deku and pretty much think that yeah, he is definitely so much better than him, saying that him getting 1st place during the robot section must have been a fluke. Yeah, that's what it was. As, after this would be over, Bakugo wouldn't exactly antagonize Deku, having thought that he pretty much won for the day, as Deku, after the entire school day would be over, would realize that there's definitely things he still needs to work on, with one of those being his physical body more, realizing that without his quirk, he's still average, he's weak, and so Deku would now start focusing on training his actual body. But because it isn't exactly going to happen overnight, and this is going to be something gradual, we're going to be skipping to the battle trial arc, in which, just like in the original, I don't really see anything changing in terms of the matchups, so it's still going to be Uraraka and Deku versus Bakugo and Ida. The second that the match would be announced, Bakugo would just get a gigantic glare, noting that he's finally going to get the chance to hurt Deku, and he's not even going to get in trouble for it. So Bakugo would prepare himself for this, and the second that it would begin, Bakugo would use his explosions to go flying towards the direction of Izuku, as Bakugo would quickly make his way towards the lower level where Deku was at, as he would throw a giant explosion at Deku, but just like in the original, Deku would parry it and actually counter him, slamming Bakugo onto the ground, as Bakugo would cough out a little bit of spit, and he would be stunned that Deku was able to dodge that point blank, with Deku saying, "You telegraph." From this point, Deku would engage Bakugo with hand-to-hand combat, as Bakugo would shoot an explosion at Deku's direction, but Deku, creating a water shield which would splatter everywhere with the water getting on the floor, would proceed to actually snuff out Bakugo's explosion. As after this, Deku, looking towards the direction of Bakugo, would pretty much hold one hand out as a beam of water would go shooting towards the direction of Bakugo, who would hold both of his arms out in front of him, but ultimately the water would still send Bakugo flying back, as Bakugo would try to, be strong and push forward, but the water would ultimately go higher in terms of the water pressure, sending Bakugo crashing into the wall, where Bakugo would be stunned at the output that Deku has with his water quirk and the control that he has, wondering if Deku was this strong this whole time, as Deku would shoot another burst of water at the direction of Bakugo that he would block this time by pretty much just jumping out of the way, as Bakugo would say, "Guess I underestimated you, Deku. but I won't make that mistake again, as he would pull a pin off of one of his gauntlets and a gigantic explosion would go shooting off in the second story of the hallway. It'd be at this point that Deku, seeing this giant explosion coming towards him, would hold one hand out as the water would form a little blockade. It's like a water wall would form in front of him, blocking the explosion and tanking most of the damage, as Deku would only be sent flying back a little bit, like he just got pushed a bit back. But after this would happen, the explosion would let out a bunch of steam, as Bakugo would look towards the direction of it with a smile, thinking that had to have hit, right? But as soon as the smoke would clear, or the steam, might I say, Deku would just be standing there, as Bakugo would see this and be stunned, wondering how that's even possible. But from Bakugo's leg, he could suddenly feel his boot feel wet, as suddenly a bunch of water would actually end up covering him, and Bakugo would be stunned as to what the heck is going on, but he wouldn't realize that Deku had essentially just used a water prison on him, which would shock Bakugo and would cause him to have absolutely no oxygen. He would try to shoot explosions inside, but because he's inside of a pretty large water prison, Bakugo was completely unable to break out of it, and so he eventually ends up passing out due to lack of oxygen, as Deku would leave him on the ground and put his capture tape on top of him, not even wrapping him with it, as he would make his way towards where Uraraka's at, and Uraraka would have got captured by Ida, so Deku would quickly end up making his way to the bomb room, taking the bomb from Ida, and ultimately winning the Heroes vs. Villains event, which now leads us to the USJ event. But that's going to have to wait for part 3. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, smash the like button down below. Let me know what your favorite part of the video was, and tell me what you guys think should happen in part 3. That said, peace!